Meet Rose, the farmer's market florist. She's one of my country characters that I have collaged in my collection. The PDF of patterns for these characters is available on my website. I want to thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, please reach out. In the description or comments, I will link the 3 other videos that will help you get started with the collage. 2 are on how I build and embellish my backgrounds, and the 3rd one is how I cut and trace and use my PDF patterns to make clothing and accessories. Here you see I've already cut out Rose's dress, and now I am using IOD ink, a special brown that I mixed, and a little dauber to stain or distress the sides. Now I'm using this really cool burlap paper that I found at a craft store for the hat. I really love this. I didn't even know it existed. I scrapbooked years ago and never have seen that burlap paper before. The patterns are simple and straightforward and really easy to adapt. I kept it simple that way so you could add your own flair. Many of the clothing and accessory items in my PDFs can be combined between this collection and my new collection PDF called Fur Family. These patterns are scaled to fit the IOD Farm Animal stamp, but if you don't own this set of stamps, I have hand-drawn the same farm animals in a simple form that you can use for this project as well as and also for textile collaging. When your stamps are new, you need to lightly sand them in each direction with a very fine sandpaper that will help the ink to stay on that surface of the stamp. You see, I also lightly sanded this scrapbook paper because it had a little bit of a sheen to it, and I wanted to reduce the amount of wait time for the ink to dry. I want to use these now. I would recommend when you're cutting it out, give yourself plenty of extra room. Don't cut off the size so close the way I did this time, because you want to shimmy it around your collage and you don't want to restamp if you've cut off too much. This image is small and I'm not sure if you can see what I'm talking about, but when I do cut, I leave the tiniest bit of paper around the outside line. I like to take my dauber, dab it into the ink pad, and then distress the very edges of each piece so that they look more vintage and a bit distressed. I usually take a black acrylic pen and highlight the eyes. Then I put a tiny little dot of white for shine. If you get too much white, because you've used the black acrylic under it, you can wipe it away quickly and try again. Here I'm using some colored pencils to highlight some of her features and to bring out some of her coloring. Now I will use my new favorite IOD stamp set, Apothecary Labels, to create some of my lettering. I've cut up small pieces of an IOD thin mount to start building each word. I place the letters where I can see them visibly and spell out the words. So the flat surface is going to be facing me. The raised surface is going to be facing the paper or the thin mount. Grids make it easy to line up the letters but I don't worry too much about it if they're not perfect, because this is a hand-created collage. I have my letters arranged. I use a second piece of thin mount to pick it up to make my stamp. I apologize if my head gets in the view of the camera sometimes. I get in my zone and don't even notice. To avoid an inky mess, lay the stamp facing up. Tap very lightly with a juicy ink pad. If your ink pad dries out, you can use the refillable IOD ink refills, and then place your stamp carefully and press down. Before I disassemble my words and put them back in the envelopes, I stamp a couple more times. I can cut these words up and use them in future collages. I use a shop towel that's damp or a wet wipe to clean the stamps, but if that doesn't do it, I use a very gentle soap and a vegetable brush. I think this is a mushroom brush, so it works really well with the stamps. You see, I keep the pieces of thin mount in the little envelope that comes with the apothecary labels. Because I have two different videos of how I build my backgrounds, we are going to skip ahead to what makes Rose special. Rose was born with the rosiest of cheeks, and that's where she got her name. As she grew, she loved gardens and she loved growing flowers. And now she is finally living her lifetime dream of selling her flowers at the farmer's market. Here I'm using a Sharpie grease pen to mark out where I want to place my lettering. Marking it out, and then I'm going to be first planning out where I'm going to stamp, and I want to highlight those areas. I'm going to lighten them up a little bit. This is a Craft Artisan paint, and I'm going to be watering it down and brushing it over the areas where I think need to be highlighted for my stamping. I like to use craft paint. This is a mineral based paint because I don't have to wait as long for the paint to dry before I can stamp over it. Also, the ink dries much more quickly on a clay based or a mineral based paint. For any of these supplies, try out what you already have. Do a little test sampling and see if it works. Where I will be placing my handwritten words, I've marked those very lightly with a pencil, so you probably can't see it in this video. Now I'm stamping my stamps before I hand draw the other lettering, just to make sure of sizing. I can always make my hand-drawn lettering smaller or larger to fit the space I have after I stamp. I was having trouble with this pen. I should have grabbed my Posca pen. Those work, I think, a little bit better, but when you are writing in white over a darker surface, you usually have to go over it twice. Sometimes I even do it 3 times just to make the lettering pop. I continue to add detail with my colored pencils and my paint pens, and sometimes I overdo it, but I try to keep it simple and clean so that it doesn't take away from my character. If I need to, I add a bit of shadowing to my letters. A good place to take a look at how letters are shadowed, if you go to Pinterest, I search like chalkboard fonts or chalkboard messages, and they have some really good ideas for shading and shadowing. When my lettering and mark making is all dry, it's time to decoupage. This is my favorite part. So it's pretty simple. I lay down the decoupage medium or brush it with a very soft brush on my substrate or my background. Then I brush the back of the little piece, place it down, and then decoupage over the top. This not only glues it all together, but it seals it at the same time. I use many different things for decoupaging. Look in your stash. I've got my DIY liquid patina, but I also love matte medium. And if I have really thick pieces and lots of layers, I sometimes use matte Mod Podge. I can always go over the top of this with a shiny bright sealer if I want to, or a resin, whatever I want to do to seal it. This one I'm going to keep matte because I am adding some textiles. So once my decoupage is dry, I'm cutting up little pieces of some vintage lace I have to accent her dress or outfit. All the little textiles, like this lace and the embroidered flower I put on her hat, I adhere them with a tacky glue, either tacky glue or weld bond or tight bond, any kind of tacky glue you might have. If you haven't collaged before, I hope you give it a try. It is so therapeutic. Thank you for watching and happy creating.